Thanks for joining us. I've been doing this call for about a year and a half now. We've been franchising for coming on 2 years soon. March of 2021 is when we launched. March 2021 is when we were legally able to sell franchises. So we will be coming on our 2-year anniversary from the date that we were able to launch as a brand relatively soon. We've really subscribed to the oil change only model, and that's resonated. So we've done a really good job of selling units because the model, I think everybody typically has an oil change story. And so when we talk about our brand and what we're trying to do, it does speak to our candidates, and we feel as though we're filling a void in the consumer space, and that typically is how great businesses are built. So I'll just get started off a little bit about me. I grew up in Portland, Maine, lived my whole life there, moved to Maryland I had a baseball scholarship, and then met my wife at college, and that's typically how you get anchored somewhere. I'm right outside of Gettysburg, so we're on the border of Pennsylvania in a suburb of Baltimore, and I grew this business out of want to build something, out of need to have my own thing. I have a background in finance, so I went through a few different institutions, starting off in retail banking with TD Bank, and then moved to TD Ameritrade in brokerage, and then Merrill Lynch asset management. And then the last company I was with before I did this full time was T. Rowe Price, which is one of the largest asset management firms and mutual fund companies in the world. And the whole time I was moving from place to place, what I didn't realize at the time was that I was a born and bred entrepreneur, and that the thing that was causing me to have discontent at these jobs was not having my own business. And so I felt that if I started a business or took over a business, that kind of would scratch that itch, and I would stop moving from place to place. And while I was at T. Rowe Price, which was a really good job that I really liked, and I had invested quite a bit of my time and resources into, I had several securities licenses at that point, including a Series 6, 7, 63, and 66, as well as the insurance licenses to be able to sell variable annuities and manage them. I didn't have any intention of actually leaving my job at T. Rowe Price, but I thought, let me get a business that can be run by a manager, and that might scratch that itch, and I'll stop having that wandering eye. And so I started looking at businesses that I felt were manager centric, but not skilled manager centric. If you've ever listened to any of these previous calls, that's kind of the terminology I've adopted for this. Because what I found was, coming from a family of immigrants that have owned small businesses, where it's important for every family member to be a part of the business in order for it to run right, that wasn't something that was really viable for me. I couldn't be there because I had a 50+ hour a week job at T. Rowe Price. And so something like a pizzeria would not be something that would be viable, because if your head pizza maker goes down, then you got to close the place down. And so I wanted to look at businesses where there was continuity, whether the manager was calling off sick or taking his regular days off. And so I looked at a few different concepts, and the quick lube space filled that, as long as it was run as a traditional quick lube. And so if you're not doing all these other services that require higher qualifications and skilled services, you could run the business using a just manager-centered facility, and you wouldn't have to worry about if the manager quits, do you have to shut the store down, do you have to go in and run the place, et cetera, et cetera. So I took over a mom and pop quick lube in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, that was most likely going to be out of business if someone didn't step in. And I kind of was able to implement my worldview on the business and make it my own, and change the way things were being done. And it turned around relatively quickly, and we were able to open a second location. At that point, I had left T. Rowe Price because I had a lot of fun building the business and kind of putting my view on how things should be run. I spent a lot of time in those days at T. Rowe Price. I probably wasn't as productive as I could have been those last days at T. Rowe Price. I spent a lot of time on Yelp, kind of reverse engineering the reviews, because at the time in 2013, 14, Yelp was still fairly relevant as a source of information for consumers. And so I would take those reviews of our competitors and see, okay, what is not working, what is working, what do people like, and what do they don't like, which was more common in our industry, was figuring out what they don't like. And so by honing in on those things and really creating a model that allowed me to remain absentee and not have to be there actually changing oil, we were able to scale. The third location we opened was in Mount Prospect, Illinois. And so that really solidified our brand as an absentee brand, because I could not be in Illinois on a regular basis. It was, it's an 8 to 10 hour drive to get from Baltimore to Chicago. And so I would fly in once a month in those early days, but relatively quickly I was able to not have to be there at all. And especially during COVID, we were 4 years into the store at that point, and I didn't go to Chicago at all in 2020. I mean, a lot of people didn't go anywhere in 2020. So that really wove into the DNA of the business, the absentee model, and really emphasized our use of SOPs and checklists and procedures to make sure there was a smooth running business. And so that really is how we started opening up stores in different markets. We then went to Pittsburgh and Youngstown, Ohio. We filled out the footprint in Eastern Ohio, Western Pennsylvania. And then when we got to store number 10, I started thinking about what is the best way to scale this? Because obviously there's a consumer demand for this type of service. And it seems as though the larger players are getting away from this service. So what is the best way to scale quickly? And the answer to that was franchising. And so we teamed up with Fran Devco because they have experience in the space. A lot of the people there had worked with Driven Brands and Meineke when Meineke was not a national brand. And sometimes it's tough to remember that all these national brands at one point were small businesses. And so teaming up with people who have been able to allow us to avoid some of the pitfalls of emerging brands and people who brashly rush into franchising, that was a huge boon for us to have these people in our corner, people like Michael, people like Chris, and then Sung, the head of that office. And so we've very smoothly transitioned into being a multi-unit franchise operation with stores opening nearly on a monthly basis at this point, while avoiding a lot of the growing pains that some brands seem to have. So we got 20 minutes of questions. I'm going to cut my story short there. There's a lot more. I have some videos on YouTube of earlier calls that are much longer that if you're more interested in the backstory and my backstory, you can go in and listen to them. But I do want to get to questions because we have a handful of people on the call today, and it's the best way to really talk about the business model and get those questions answered. We have discovery days every third Thursday of the month that you can join us virtually, or if you're so inclined, you can come to our headquarters and sit in on it. So we don't really want to, that's where we talk about the secret sauce per se versus the questions on here. We want to try to keep them as high level as possible, but feel free to ask pointed questions. But we do have discovery day, which is geared towards those more specific pointed questions, and I'll let Michael curate.
Great. Costa, thank you. And I believe Rob and Jeremy are already committed to coming in person to December. Rob just joined us as well. He is from Minneapolis. And so we're represented all around the country. And Kevin, certainly, I think we've talked about it already. You're welcome to join us. And Jonathan, I wanted to welcome you from Virginia. Thank you for joining us. In the event you missed the beginning, the calls are recorded on YouTube. Anyway, let's start with a round robin, just so everyone gets a chance to ask a question. And by the way, the K in the screen, if you see a K in blue or I think it's blue or purple, that's Chris Longmore. He's an associate of mine, and he also works with candidates as well. So he's on the call. Jeremy, why don't we start with you if you have a question for Costa?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Michael. Costa, so a couple of questions, perhaps two. I'll keep it short. And do you have any plan to, so right now, I know you've talked about doing, obviously, oil changes and such, but any plans in the future to add any additional services?
No, our core tenants are gonna always revolve around the oil change service.
Okay.
We have trademarked the phrase the oil change only store. We're really committed to that as a service. And if you really look at the brands and startups that have happened in the last couple of years, and COVID really amplified this, but any brand that reduces the friction between a consumer and a product, or the consumer and a service, those are the brands that have been winning. And who would have ever thought that fast food could get faster? When Ray Kroc had people walk up to the counter and then drive up to the counter and then drive up to the menu board, and then you say a number, and you used to have to say the whole meal, and then you say, give me a number one. And now we have mobile ordering where you place the order, then you show up, they throw the order through your window and you drive away. Like, that's just kind of the natural progression of everything, it seems like, in our society. And so the oil change industry was really before its time. And so we think that moving back to the original model that created the industry in the first place is what's going to be, especially as electric vehicles start penetrating the market on a bigger scale, that's what's going to be what is left behind. The sleeker, smaller, more streamlined, less overhead, less employees version. You're still going to need oil changes. There's 350 million internal combustion engines registered in the United States. And even if that number gets cut in half, there surely are industries made up of less than 170 plus thousand million, of that consumer. And so our main KPIs are car count, ticket average, and bay time. And as long as we stick to those things, we feel as though the business model will have a very long runway. That's not to say we don't have ancillary products. I mentioned bay time specifically to talk about ancillary products. We have what are called pop and pours in our industry, and they're just additives that can be added for fuel injector cleaners and things like that. And some of these things are required. So you have, Volkswagen and Audi GDI engines that, per their owner's manual, in order to be compliant, you need to do a fuel system cleaner every 7,500 miles. And so these are very high margin items. And then you have things like wiper blades and air filters and other services that don't add on to bay time. And so for us, as long as it doesn't add on to bay time, we're going to be open to it. However, we want our core business to remain the oil change only.
Okay, thank you. And one more question if we have time. Quickly, I would like to hear from you. I mean, obviously, I haven't been to a Costa location yet, but if I take a place like Tech 5 or any other competitor, I would say, what are some of the key differentiator, I guess? Why would I go Costa and not any other brand, for instance?
Yeah, so a lot of our differentiators are internally realized versus external to the consumer. So we don't have employees that are looking over their shoulder for their job because their compensation is based on high pressure sales tactics, which then means that translates to the tenure of our employees being a little bit longer. We don't have sales goals that create the bonus structure for the management. And so these things in the long tail lead to us not being susceptible to some of these quote unquote labor issues and that some of the other brands are having at the moment, where they're understaffed or unable to staff and closing stores down because no one showed up to work. We've created a culture within our system that our employees feel empowered by knowing that the only thing they're doing is something they're really good at. They don't feel like they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. A lot of these other brands, they have two alternatives. They either overcompensate to get someone qualified to do these extra services that they're offering, and then you then you're overpaying. And then, or you roll the dice with someone who's not qualified to do these services, and then you have high liability services being performed with people who really shouldn't be doing them. And so that's first and foremost. When people ask me what our moat is, and moat is just kind of a informal business way of asking what separates you from everyone else, for me, it's the dedication to the oil change only model. Take 5, definitely their media surrounds that narrative, but I don't think that they do as good of a job sticking to that. So our differentiator is always going to be putting a retail first focus on our business, automotive second, and also, we have a proprietary flow chart which we share at Discovery Day, and this flow chart allows us to do volume that other service centers would need double the amount of employees to do the same work. And so that's our biggest moat, is our proprietary flow chart, and Michael has seen it. And you can see it as well if you join us for Discovery Day, or if you want to shoot me an email, I can send it as well.
Okay, absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Costa, thanks. Jeremy, I don't think I did a good job when you asked the question, working with you so far. I'm just teasing, but I think 3 other things I wanted to mention that I see talking, to other individuals like yourselves on the phone that have looked at other brands, is the cost. You're looking at some of these bigger brands, Take 5, Grease Monkey, etc., $1 million to get into it. And I think what I see with Costa personally, this is a shout out to him, is the relationships that he's built with his vendors, his suppliers. And based on my information, our input costs are lower, both the oil and the filters. I think, as you start doing 200-300 cars a week, that certainly plays into an advantage. And then I think the innovative play, on some different options for real estate. You've got the kiosk, you have conversions of single bay car washes, and then we also have, which Costa has been very successful on, these conversions of traditional locations. So anyway, I just wanted to add that in. Kevin, you're up next.
That, Michael. I just wanted to hear from the founder. That's all. You have done a great job. No worries.
I missed that. I'm sorry.
No, I was saying you have done a great job. I just wanted to hear it from that's all.
I know. I was teasing you. Kevin, you're up next. If you have a question for Costa.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the time, gentlemen. So my big issue in Houston here is market saturation. It's very segregated in regards to where all of the traffic is. I mean, you guys are familiar with looking at the maps of where to put locations and whatnot, and the traffic plans and heat maps and all that good stuff. But typically when you find some of those areas, the saturation in the oil business is pretty high. The company, I'm not going to go through your competitors, but there's one street that I drive down here, and I'm not exaggerating. Within a mile, there are 5 different oil change locations. Of course, that also includes, some mechanic shops as well. But can you talk through market saturation? And I realize this is kind of on top of Mr. Benzang. I'm mispronouncing your last name, Mr. B. His question. But I think you understand where I'm going, and if you could talk through that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so the data shows from the insurance companies that Houston has the highest per capita car registration in the entire country. So it's no surprise when you see in Houston Take 5 dropping tens of millions of dollars, Valvoline, Oil Change Express, Tire Engineers. There is a lot of saturation in the Houston market, but there's also the amount of cars to sustain that. So as you look at different markets and you see why these things are happening. It's all data driven. They would not be pouring the kind of money that they're pouring if it weren't for that. So our approach has traditionally been to not, this is counterintuitive to our industry. A lot of the time, Valvoline stayed away from where Jiffy Lube was, and a lot of the brands don't like being near Jiffy Lube. But I see the Jiffy Lube move into the multi-care space as an opportunity, because these people are being exposed to a service that is different from their dad's Jiffy Lube. It's more geared towards other services, higher ticket average, longer wait times, longer bay times. And so I have had a lot of success being near competitors because, one, those consumers are already educated on the service model. That's not something like they're expecting to have to set an appointment. They're like waiting to, go into they drop their car off and walk away like that. With your quick lube educated consumer, there's a easier transition. So then it's just about, getting them to get in the door. And so people typically choose their consumer behavior on three things, in my opinion, and you may view it differently, but in my opinion, people would pick any business for three reasons, and that's atmosphere, experience, and price. And so atmosphere, pretty self-explanatory. Does the facility look nice? Is the lot clean? Is the presentation of the service, is it good experience? And then experience is the service itself. Well, I know that we're winning that battle. So getting them in the door is the first hurdle, because once they're in the door, we have a high retention rate. And we feel as though we provide a superior service because of our flow chart, because of our actual attention to the consumer, trying to connect on a personal level with every single consumer rather than being robotic about the service and just listing off an iPad, the intervals for the different services and not really interacting with that consumer on an individual basis. And then the third thing is price. And there's really no way around that, especially these days. Everything's more expensive. And you guys can do your own independent research. Jiffy Lube and Valvoline have already started toying with $99.99 full synthetic oil changes. And I think the consumer is really worn out by inflation at this moment. And there's going to be some pushback, especially once that dollar amount goes up over 100. There's going to be some people who just on principle are not going to change their oil for $100, and they might be more willing to sit in the waiting room of a Meineke or even do it themselves in their driveway. So we're yet to see what that holds, but we've been able to price under that because we have an ethos of brand doesn't matter to the quick lube consumer. So we're using a house oil that meets all the spec, and we don't really see any disruption to numbers by using house oil, because we believe that the average quick lube consumer doesn't care about brand. Otherwise, Mobil 1 would be the largest quick lube in the country, and it's not. And so for us, in markets like Houston, where there is a lot of saturation, what our biggest concern internally is making sure that the territories are mapped properly so no one's stepping on anyone's toes. So we don't really, we haven't really gotten into worrying about competitors at this moment in time. The Spring, Texas store will be the first location to get open in Houston, but we've sold quite a few territories there already. So we're going to be going through that process and making sure, we keep the question that you asked in mind as we go through that process.
Okay, thank you.
Jonathan, thanks for joining us. Welcome. Do you have a question for Costa? He may be on.
I have a follow-up question while he's pulling his thing up. One of the things that Michael and I were speaking about is scaling and the economics of, at what point are you putting a manager in to run multiple locations versus single locations? As an example, if I had 3 or 4 locations in a 15-minute radius, could one manager run all 4 of those? And how do you see that looking?
Yeah, so that's a great point, because when we get to 3 stores, that's usually when we hire a territory manager, and we typically We've deviated from the standard model in the quick lube space. Typically for Jiffy Lubes, Valvolines, you have a manager who sits in an office at the store. You have an assistant manager who stands, at the floor, and then you have your upper bay techs, lower bay techs, and even sometimes what they call a picker and a customer service rep who checks people out. So at any given time at one of our competitors, you could have 7 to 10 people, in the shop with only 2 people doing the actual work. So each of our stores has a manager, and the manager is, if it's a market that only has one location, the manager has more powers. However, if it's a market that has multiple stores, take Central Pennsylvania, for example, we have 5 stores, and our territory manager, he spends 2 days at each store. And so traditionally, the way that our competitors do that is the territory manager typically is 4 days in an office and then 1 day on the road going store to store for 10 minutes at a time. Our territory managers participate in the actual service. They're doing oil changes. They're actually in the store for a full work day. So they have their ear to the floor on what's going on. And at 3 stores, that's when it's most viable, because then they can do 2 days in one store, 2 days in another store, and 2 days in another store. And then they really have an idea of what's happening at each location. So you can kind of pinpoint, okay, why is this store not growing in car count? Is it because, one of the employees is smoking cigarettes in the bay? Is it because, things that you could probably hide if someone's not checking in on a regular basis? Those things, they get checked very quickly with that model. So 3 stores is kind of the sweet spot. If you have under 3 stores or you only have 1 store, then you need to have a strong manager, or you need to be active yourself. And there's ways to do it. We have ways to do it. Obviously, we ran single stores and single markets for quite some time, so we know different procedures for how to best do it, but it does expose you to additional liability, especially if you're far away from the site. But there's still ways to manage it.
Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Michael,
Great.
we can continue on a little bit. I just overheard Brandon in the next room. The franchisees are taking a break from their lessons, so I don't have to go out there at this moment.
Oh, great. That's super. Okay. Jonathan?
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah, we can. Morning.
I mean, good questions so far. And just piggybacking on what they just said, I'm currently in an industry where staffing is just an absolute nightmare. So it's something I don't want to get back into a situation like that. But it just seems to me with the one manager, one tech, and then another associate. I mean, if someone has to go on vacation or get sick or whatever, I mean, it just seems like it could all fall apart. What is I mean, truly, you don't have 3 stores up and you don't have that floating person. I mean, do you need 2 part-time people instead? I mean, especially if you're not there, if it's truly absentee. I just, again, after what I've gone through the past 3 years and continually have issues, it's just something where that's an issue again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, staffing is a huge concern in any retail level business at this point in time. There's a lot of leverage. For these employees have a lot of leverage, and if they've only been in the workforce the past basically 10 years, they've only ever known a market where they have ultimate power, where they can leave without getting 2 weeks notice and have a job lined up that day. A lot of these people have not been through 2008 through 2012, where there was 100 applicants for every job. And so they don't really have a huge respect for the job itself and will leave on a dime. We've built a culture internally, corporately, that we've been able to manifest a staffing model where we don't have that kind of turnover. But even so, for our franchisees that are open, and these are the questions I field from them, especially the absentee ones, the key here is making sure there's a steady pipeline of applicants and making sure that you have a manager in place who doesn't foster an environment where the employees feel the need to leave immediately. We have a lot of things on our side that, so I take 5, for example, or Valvoline. When someone comes to us from them, they breathe a sigh of relief because they're not worried about losing their job, because they're not being yelled at for not selling enough air filters. And so we try, it's tough during the ramp up period because, and I can talk about the ramp up period, or you can watch my video on the ramp up period, but automotive does have an inherent ramp up period that other retail businesses don't have. But continuity of staff is super important in this business. And so one thing we have going for us is there's an inherent liking of the topic at hand. So I have owned a pizzeria, and a line cook will leave you for another place for a 25-cent raise. That's a foregone conclusion. There's no loyalty there. For the most part, all of our employees have an inherent love of vehicles, and that makes them a little bit stickier as well. We've created partnerships with local community colleges that have vocational schools for technology, for automotive technicians. And so having that like base level skill set also creates a base level of stickiness as well that other retail businesses don't have. But by treating it as a customer service business and looking for people who are more customer service oriented, we've fostered an environment where we haven't been nearly as debilitated by our biggest issue is when our stores get so much volume and we have to hire more people. And Jonathan, I'm sure you're aware of this, when just a couple years ago our full-time techs were being paid $10, $11, $12 an hour, and some of them that have been with me for 5 years are just now getting $15 an hour, and now we have to advertise a job for $14.50 an hour just to get them to show up. Internally, and this is kind of the conversation that gets lost in the minimum wage debate, the concern isn't so much the actual pay, it's how do I internally deal with guys who have been with me for this long, and now all of a sudden, there's like, well, this guy is starting at what I just got to a couple months ago, or 6 months ago. That's been the bigger concern. But there's no way around having staff in this business, and it's not a business that can be automated. And so that kind of in itself is a moat, but obviously it poses the staffing challenge. But, for all the reasons I just laid out, I think we've had a little bit of a better time than some of our peers in this space, because we can teach anybody to change oil. And as long as we stick to that, and we have less moving parts, it's just a lot easier on the model. And I do think that eventually this will turn, and we're not going to see this, Gen Z moving from job to job with no concern for what they leave behind in their wake. There's got to be a turning point, and I think it's coming. So there'll be a little bit more respect for the actual work being done. I could be wrong, but at least it feels like that's coming soon.
You don't think we'll be getting any folks from Twitter, right, Costa?
Yeah, no, I don't think they'll be changing oil anytime soon.
But yeah, I mean, that's a big reality check for a lot of folks. It's unfortunate, but I think you're right about the changing tide. Anyway, very good question. Rob, do you still have a few more minutes, Costa? We run to about 8:15.
Yep, go ahead.
Great. Okay. Rob, thanks for joining us. Rob, do you have a question?
Thanks for having me. I think Costa answered most of the questions. I only have 2 questions, and just kind of follow up. One is the market saturation. Not only that, those quick lube businesses, but as cars get manufactured better, some of these cars are staying on the streets for 100,000 miles without getting major repairs done. What I'm seeing is like some of the manufacturers are getting desperate to bring the customers back in. So you'll see like 5 oil changes for $99 or so forth and stuff like that. even
Yeah.
though they cannot commit to the time of us doing like a 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's the first question. The second question is, the last one that you talked about, the retention of employees. Do you have any built-in turnover rate where, every market, every industry has a, kind of number, that they expect how much they will turn over. I like the way that you said you built relationship with the vocational schools and stuff like that and the community. But what is your like a built-in turnover rate that is acceptable to any franchisee? And then what's your average wage? I thought you said like a 14.65, but do you see that going up? And I will get muted.
Yeah. So to answer your first question, you bring up a great point. The average car on the road hit an all-time high of over 12 years this year. For the first time ever, it surpassed 12 years, and that bodes well for our industry. There's an alarming statistic that bodes well for our industry, but is not great for the general health of our economy. But the average car loan is the largest it's ever been. And so as a depreciating asset, the minute you roll off the lot, you're underwater on your car. And if you're in an 84-month loan, it's not going to be very long before car dealerships start offering, 10-year loans. And when that happens, those people are going to be tied to maintaining their vehicle. And so that only benefits our industry. To your point about the free oil changes from the car dealerships, that's, we have no shortage of people who forego their free oil changes to use us because of the speed and the efficiency. They don't want to lose their car for a full day. They don't want to have to deal with the courtesy vehicle. They don't want to deal with returning it and all that. So the model itself kind of helps combat that. And so the dealerships and other service centers use oil changes as a loss leader, whereas it's obviously our primary revenue generator. But by being the best at it, by getting that top of mind brand awareness, and if there's one thing that anything has shown is that no business is too established for someone else to step in and start creeping into that top of mind brand awareness. And so while Jiffy Lube might be synonymous with fast oil change right now, that doesn't mean it will be the case 5 years from now. Just like McDonald's has been synonymous with fast food for the past however long, but now Chick-fil-A is starting to really creep into that conversation when you start asking people, what do you think of when you think of fast food? And when you think of fast food brands. So I think we do have an opportunity there to turn that top of mind brand awareness if we scale quickly enough and really execute on our model. And your second question revolved around, I'm sorry, forgive me, I went off on the first two questions. What was this other part of your question?
It was the $99 for the 5 changes.
No, there was something else after that.
Yeah, this was more about the
the retention, the
retention rate. Yes.
So the auto industry has a retention rate or has a turnover rate of 46%, which is high. It's not like mall retail high, but it's still high. Ours is more in line with car dealerships, which is about 36 to 40% turnover. And so we have seen a massive increase in our internal payroll, but we haven't seen an increase in our turnover rate. And typically when we have had turnover, it's been guys who we knew all along were using us as a stepping stone to get to either a dealership or open their own shop. So it's a double-edged sword. We get good guys that can do oil changes and do the service really well. We get them in the door by giving them the experience they need, and we get to underpay them, versus what they're actually qualified to do. We utilize their services sometimes, a couple of years and sometimes less. But that's not someone who we want to be our manager. That's someone who we would want to be just a technician doing the service. And so we put a real focus on the managers, and the manager position is easily the most important part of the equation. And so I have guys that have been with me 6-7 years. And my original employee actually still works for me in Harrisburg, and he's been with me 8+ years. And all what you gotta do is just care. And it sounds cliche, but like, if you find out what's most important to these guys and you treat them right, they'll stick around for you. So like, a good example is for our North sales manager has been with me 6 years, going on 7. And I buy him tickets to the Penguins every year because I know that's him and his wife's favorite thing. And it costs me maybe $100 a year to do that. But that's going to mean way more to him than a $500 Amazon gift card. And so just taking the time to figure out what it is that these guys care about. Is it bonuses? Is it secure job security? Is it the ability to move up in the company? Is it responsibilities? Just finding those things out, and you can get people to be really loyal to you. So Kevin just asked a question in the chat, and this actually blends into the question: what's the average salary for the manager? Kevin, it's pretty market driven. So we have a manager in Illinois in the Chicago market that gets about $50,000, $55,000 a year. And then we have managers in Cleveland and Eastern Ohio that are probably around $38,000, $40,000 a year. So it's very driven by the market. And it's also driven by, again, what their wants and needs are. So if you can fulfill those needs, if they're more concerned about stability and they just know they're going to have a job, you have to remember most of our industry is built on a hourly rate and a per job basis. And so when you come into our system and you're going to make X amount of dollars no matter what, whether a car shows up, or not, there's a lot of power in that. Whereas if you go work for like a Pep Boys or a Firestone and you're being paid a job rate and no one, and they don't generate any business, then you don't get paid. We lose guys to dealerships all the time. We have a dealership out here that was started by a former IndyCar champion, Bobby Rahal, and he's got Toyota, he's got Honda, he's got all kinds of dealerships, and we lose young guys to them all the time. And a lot of them end up coming back because they end up getting put into a bullpen where their job rotates based on who's next in line. And if you're relegated to doing tire rotations, brakes, and oil changes, and you only have a certain amount of those in a week, and you have 5 guys ahead of you, you end up not making as much money, even though on paper your hourly rate might be $35 an hour. But if the dealership's rate a oil change as a 0.5 hour job, and you're only doing a couple of them, then you're not making as much money than if you were $15 an hour or $12 an hour, $13 an hour, making a 45-hour work week. So does that answer your question, Kevin?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Costa, if I could just add to that, you do have situations where if you take Daryl and Mark, for example, where they've been together, and I think one of the advantages of potentially having a smaller pool of employees is the manager has better control in a sense of who they work with. There's not as much politics going on. But if you look at Daryl and Mark, they've been working together for 5 years in Youngstown?
Yeah, they've been there. Well, actually, they just had their 5-year reunion, 5-year anniversary yesterday on the 14th.
Oh, wow. Did you buy them a cake?
No, we gave them $1,000 cash because they won a contest that we did system wide, and Brandon just went out there. We had a NCAA tournament style bracket for Google reviews, and Boardman and North Versailles ended up in the championship, and Boardman ended up winning. So we gave them $1,000 cash, and then we had some other tchotchke we gave out, like mugs and stuff, to the other stores that did well.
Nice.
But nothing specific for the 5-year.
Okay. Huh. Good. Do you have to run, Costa?
Yeah, the franchisees are back. I hear Brandon talking in the next
Okay.
room, and I'm sure he's waiting for me to, because I have to. We're doing operations today, so it's the meat and potatoes of training.
Yep. Well, thank you. And I really appreciate everyone else getting on the call. It's fun to have you talking with Costa, and hopefully we'll see all of you in December. Possibly I'm going in person, so I'll be there as well. And I have 2 other couples that are going to be coming, so it should be a good end of the year get together.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks,
Well,
everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Costa. Thank you,
Take
Michael.
care. Yep.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.